Have you ever imagined opening your garage door, not to find an old project car, but a fully functional flying machine built with your own two hands? Now picture that strange mechanical creation roaring to life and actually taking off into the sky. What kind of builder would trust an aircraft assembled in the same workshop where most people keep their tools and lawnmowers? Today, we are counting down 10 of the craziest homemade and experimental aircraft ever built. Machines with unconventional engines, exposed frames, bizarre designs, and engineering ideas that look almost impossible. Stay with us until the very end, because the number one aircraft looks less like a conventional flying machine and more like something that escaped from a science fiction laboratory. Kicking off our list at number 10 is the Wood Sky Pup, a true testament to the extreme lengths of budget backyard engineering. Originating in the United States, this ultralight was designed for the absolute purist, who refuses to use modern aerospace materials. Classified strictly as a Part 103 ultralight, it represents the ultimate low-cost entry into aviation. Builders construct this airframe using basic Douglas fir and aircraft-grade plywood. It is frequently powered by a lightweight 18-horsepower engine. This keeps the empty weight right around 200 pounds and reaches speeds of 50 miles per hour. When you see the Sky Pup in the air, the visual design is striking. It looks exactly like a giant flying balsa wood glider from a hobby shop. The wings are incredibly thick, covered entirely in woven Dacron fabric, and completely lack traditional ailerons. The pilot relies purely on the rudder for roll control. The real-world application of the Sky Pup is strictly recreational. It provides a beautiful weekend flyer for calm morning air. It proves you only need patience, epoxy, and a two-car garage to experience the absolute miracle of solo flight. The most fascinating anecdote about the Sky Pup is that early blueprints aim for unrealistic weight goals. This led builders to realize they had to carefully manage every single drop of wood glue to stay legally under the FAA 254-pound limit. We give it a sketch factor rating of 4 out of 10, simply because you are flying a hollow wooden crate. It is a beautiful machine for traditionalists, but if you think trusting your life to wood and foam is a bit sketchy, wait until you see what happens when someone bolts aluminum tubes together. Coming in at number 9 is the Affordaplane, the ultimate embodiment of the FAA Part 103 legal loophole, built on a shoestring budget. Designed in the late 1990s by Dave Edwards, this aircraft was created with one singular mission: to get anyone into the air for absolute minimum cash. The entire airframe is constructed from square aluminum tubing. It relies on a 40-horsepower Rotax engine, pushing it to a cruise speed of 55 miles per hour. A first-time garage builder can expect to spend about 500 hours putting this flying lawn chair together. Visually, the Affordaplane is completely stripped down to the bare essentials. It lacks any sleek cowlings or aerodynamic fairings. The pilot sits completely exposed to the wind. They straddle a single aluminum keel tube with the loud two-stroke engine screaming right behind their head. The real-world application for this aircraft is purely grassroots flying for average blue-collar workers who refuse to let the high costs of general aviation keep them grounded. It is raw, incredibly noisy, and gives you a visceral, unfiltered connection to the sky that modern enclosed airplanes simply cannot provide. The craziest fact about this build is that the aluminum frame is held together not by high-tech welding, but by hundreds of stainless steel pop rivets and standard aviation bolts. Because it relies heavily on rivet integrity, we give the Affordaplane a sketch factor rating of 6 out of 10. It is mechanically sound if built right, but you feel every single bump. However, before modern cheap aluminum kits took over the skies, there was a true pioneer that started the entire ultralight craze, and our next machine is an absolute legend. At number 8, we have the legendary Quicksilver MX. If you were around the aviation scene in the 1980s, this is the machine that defined the ultralight revolution in America. Originally starting its life as a simple weight-shift hang glider, the Quicksilver evolved when crazy backyard engineers decided to bolt small engines onto the back. It is completely optimized for low and slow flight, typically powered by a classic 50-horsepower dual carburetor engine. Weighing roughly 240 pounds empty, it cruises safely at a very gentle 45 miles per hour over open farm fields. Aesthetically, the Quicksilver is instantly recognizable by its pusher propeller configuration and massive fabric-covered wings with a sweeping dihedral angle. The pilot is suspended in an open sling seat beneath the wing, completely immersed in the roaring blast of the engine exhaust. In the real world, the Quicksilver MX was used for everything from weekend joyrides to low-level crop dusting over small agricultural plots. It represents a golden era when aviation regulations were essentially the Wild West, and anyone with a wrench and a few $1,000s could legally become a pilot. An interesting structural detail is the massive web of stainless steel flying wires holding the entire airframe together. It earns a sketch factor rating of 5 out of 10, mostly because those tension wires require constant checking before every single flight. If one snaps, the wing geometry fails. The MX is a historical icon of the DIY flight movement, but if the Quicksilver is a classic normal-looking ultralight, what happens when an aerospace genius decides to throw traditional aerodynamic proportions completely out the window for maximum efficiency? Number 7 brings us back to the Wing Dingo, a truly bizarre and highly obscure experimental aircraft hailing from the harsh outback of Australia. Designed in the 1980s, this Homebuilt completely rejected standard kit plane norms. It was built for rough bush-style flying on an absolute shoestring budget. Technically, the Wing Dingo is an absolute mechanical oddity. Now, it is powered by a heavily modified Volkswagen Flat 4 automotive engine. This engine puts out around 60 horsepower. Weighing a hefty 600 pounds empty, it struggles to reach cruise speeds of 75 miles per hour. This makes it an incredibly sluggish performer. Visually, the aircraft is jarring and forces everyone to do a massive double take. Look at this. It features a strange twin-boom tail setup and a stubby, almost disproportionately wide fuselage. The wings look slightly too small for the chunky cockpit. Furthermore, the tricycle landing gear is incredibly tall. This gives the aircraft a stance like a mechanical praying mantis. Yes, the real-world application of this strange machine was meant for outback utility. It utilized cheap, readily available automotive parts instead of expensive aviation hardware to bounce over dirt runways and desert scrub. The biggest anecdote surrounding the Wing Dingo is its notorious reputation for heavy wing loading at low speeds. Because builders used whatever steel tubing they had lying around, the aircraft often ended up dangerously tail-heavy. This required a pilot with serious muscle to keep the nose pitched down during a stall. The combination of an unproven aerodynamic profile and heavy car parts earns the Wing Dingo a solid sketch factor rating of 7 out of 10. However, if you think that design looks odd, prepare yourself for a historical machine, a machine whose fatal design flaw was outlawed by an entire nation. Landing at number 6 is the infamous Mignet HM-14, universally known as the Flying Flea. Created in France in the 1930s, this was one of the very first attempts to create a people's airplane that could be built in a standard garage. Mignet published the blueprints in a book, sparking a massive DIY craze. It was typically powered by a small 30-horsepower motorcycle engine. Weighing roughly 200 pounds, it could put along at 60 miles per hour. The concept was brilliant. Eliminate standard ailerons and control everything using a single steering stick. Visually, the Flying Flea looked exactly like a tiny aggressive insect, with its short, stubby fuselage and heavily cambered tandem wings. To control altitude, the pilot actually pivoted the entire front wing up and down, changing the aerodynamic profile of the aircraft in real time. The original real-world application was to democratize flight for the European working class. It allowed farmers and shopkeepers to build their own airplanes using basic hand tools and cheap wood. It sounded like an absolute utopian dream for aviation enthusiasts until the fatal crashes began to mount. The flying flea hid a deadly verified aerodynamic secret. If the pilot pushed the nose down too sharply, the airflow between the front and rear wings would overlap, creating a permanent aerodynamic lock. The aircraft would violently dive and flip over, causing a series of fatal accidents. Because of this unrecoverable design error, we give the original design a terrifying sketch factor rating of 9 out of 10. The French government actually stepped in and permanently outlawed it. Speaking of history, what if you want to fly a legendary warbird? Coming in at number 5 is the Airdrome Fokker Dr. I replica. Listen, this is not an ultralight. This is a full-blown experimental amateur-built aircraft. For those who want the adrenaline of World War I dogfighting without paying millions, the Airdrome kit is the ultimate garage project. It replaces the heavy wooden structure of the original fighter with modern aircraft-grade riveted aluminum tubing. Under the cowl, builders install a modern 110-horsepower Rotec radial engine. Weighing around 550 pounds empty, this absolute beast can cruise aggressively at roughly 85 miles per hour through the clouds. The visual appeal of this machine is completely off the charts. It is a massive triplane, meaning it features 3 stacked wings, often painted in the iconic blood-red colors of the infamous Red Baron. When you hear the mechanical roar of that radial engine and see this thing diving out of the sky, it looks like a ghost of history screaming into the modern age. Builders use these replicas primarily for weekend air shows, tactical formation flying, and pure, unfiltered historical joyrides, turning a suburban garage into a literal mechanical time machine. An incredible fact about this build is that despite its intimidating historical reputation, the use of modern materials and proven aluminum engineering actually makes it incredibly safe and structurally sound. It earns a very respectable sketch factor rating of 5 out of 10. Primarily because landing a tail dragger with a narrow wheelbase always requires excellent footwork on the rudder pedals. It is a stunning piece of accessible aviation history, but speaking of historical dogfighters, what if you want an aggressive warbird, but you are working with a very strict, tight budget? Number 4 on our list is the Newport 11 replica. Much like the Fokker, this is an experimental kit plane, but with a brilliant engineering twist. It is built at a 78% scale. By shrinking the aircraft slightly, kit manufacturers drastically reduce the structural load requirements, bringing the total build price down to around $10,000. The construction utilizes aluminum tube gusseting secured by heavy-duty blind rivets. It is frequently powered by a 50-horsepower modified Volkswagen automotive engine, weighing just 280 pounds empty and cruising at 65 miles per hour. Visually, it features the classic biplane configuration with a large upper wing and a much smaller lower wing. This creates an aggressive, nose-high stance on the runway. The open cockpit leaves the pilot exposed to the oil and exhaust of the engine, providing an incredibly visceral World War I flying experience. The real-world application of the 78% Newport is to provide an affordable, lightweight gateway into extreme historical aviation. Because the airframe is so light, that little VW bug engine provides excellent climb rates and surprisingly nimble dogfighting handling characteristics. The most interesting part of this build is the reliance on a heavily modified 1960s car engine to keep you airborne. While VW engines are legendary for their reliability on the ground, using one in an aircraft requires constant maintenance and a certain level of mechanical bravery. We rate its sketch factor at 6 out of 10 for that exact reason. This plane proves that you don't need a military budget to feel like an ace. But what if you want to hover using a completely homemade turbine engine? Brace yourselves for number 3, the helicycle. This is where backyard engineering crosses the line into absolute madness. The helicycle is an experimental single-seat kit helicopter, and it is arguably the most complex machine a civilian can build in their garage. Costing around $40,000, it requires nearly 1,000 hours of precision assembly. You are building a complex elastomeric rotor head and a highly sensitive tail rotor drive system. It weighs an impressive 500 pounds empty and can cruise through the sky at a blistering 95 miles per hour. The absolute craziest part of this build is the power plant. The helicycle is powered by a verified military surplus turbine engine, originally designed to start larger aircraft. Producing a screaming 160 shaft horsepower, this tiny turbine drinks jet fuel and spins at over 60,000 revolutions per minute. Visually, it looks like a high-tech robotic mosquito. The real-world application is pure, unadulterated engineering prestige. When the pilot hits the igniter, the high-pitched turbine whine sounds exactly like a commercial jet, spooling up right in the middle of your suburban driveway. Because helicopters are inherently unstable and require massive mechanical precision to keep from shaking themselves apart, the margin for error during assembly is zero. A single missed cotter pin during the build can be catastrophic in mid-air. For this reason, the helicycle commands a solid sketch factor rating of 8 out of 10. It represents the absolute pinnacle of what a private citizen can achieve with hand tools and dedication. However, if this already seems highly unusual, the next one takes it even further into factory-grade experimental rotorcraft perfection. At number 2 is the Autogyro Calidus. Let's clear the air right now. This is not a sketchy home-built machine assembled with hardware store bolts. This is a state-of-the-art factory-built experimental light sport rotorcraft imported directly from Germany. Costing upwards of $100,000, it is a masterclass in modern engineering. Utilizing full carbon fiber and fiberglass composite construction to achieve incredible strength. It is powered by a 115 horsepower turbocharged Rotax engine. Weighing 600 pounds, it can cruise at 100 miles per hour while burning very little fuel. Visually, the Calidus looks like a sleek enclosed aerodynamic spaceship with a massive free-spinning rotor bolted to the roof. Unlike a helicopter, the overhead rotor is not mechanically connected to the engine during flight. Instead, the rear-mounted engine pushes the aircraft forward, and the wind passing up through the free-spinning blades causes them to turn, creating lift through auto-rotation. In the real world, it is actively used by law enforcement, border patrol, and extreme sports enthusiasts, those who want the ultimate panoramic view while flying safely in very heavy crosswinds. The most incredible engineering fact about the Calidus is its physics-defying safety profile. Because the lift is generated by auto-rotation, the aircraft physically cannot stall. If the engine completely dies in mid-air, the rotors keep spinning from the downward airflow, allowing it to gently parachute to the ground. Thanks to its German engineering and stall-proof physics, it earns a highly safe sketch factor rating of just 3 out of 10. We've seen history and we've seen advanced rotors, but the final machine on our list is purely insane. Taking the number 1 spot is the Phantom X1. If the Part 103 ultralight rules were meant to encourage slow, gentle flight over open fields, the Phantom X1 is the machine that completely abused the rulebook. Built for pure adrenaline, this kit aircraft looks and performs exactly like a lightweight fighter jet. It utilizes an incredibly strong, fully triangulated chromoly steel roll cage paired with aluminum wings. Powered by a screaming 65 horsepower two-stroke engine, it weighs just 250 pounds empty but can easily hit top speeds over 80 miles per hour. Visually, the Phantom X1 features a completely open cockpit, a radically swept-back wing design, and a menacing, predatory stance on the tarmac. When the pilot pushes the throttle forward, it leaps off the ground and accelerates with a terrifying power-to-weight ratio. The real-world application of this aircraft is entirely focused on high-G aerobatic thrills. It is highly responsive, brutally fast, and completely unforgiving of amateur mistakes. It was engineered specifically to pull positive and negative G-forces that would literally tear standard tube and fabric ultralight aircraft to absolute shreds in mid-air. The most intense aspect of the Phantom X1 is that it strips away all modern safety nets in the pursuit of raw speed and maneuverability. Flying it requires absolute focus and razor-sharp reflexes, as the open-air cockpit exposes you entirely to the brutal forces of the wind. Because it pushes the absolute legal and physical limits of what a lightweight experimental aircraft can do, it claims the ultimate sketch factor rating of 10 out of 10. It is the ultimate flying danger zone built only for the most hardcore pilots. These machines are not just metal, wood, and fabric. They represent raw human ingenuity and the relentless DIY spirit of aviation. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 10 machines has the most impressive engineering? Would you trust an aircraft held together by pop rivets? Or do you demand welded chromoly tubing? Is there an insane home-built aircraft I missed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next video on the craziest custom diesel trucks. Keep your wrenches turning.